Membership and Engagement Coordinator here. If this is your first time visiting with us, welcome. We're glad you took the time to join us here. If you'd like more information about our church and our worship community, please feel free and send me an email. In the meantime, again, welcome. We're so glad you took the time to join us.
Welcome to West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church, a spiritual community whose hope is audacious and whose vision is for a more just and equitable world for all. I'm Melinda McGuckin, Worship Associate. Joining me today are David Blazer, Music Director, Christine Solante, Tech Guru, and a special welcome today to our guest speaker, Dr. Param Srikantia, Professor, School of Business at Baldwin Wallace University. Param is a former television host and TEDx speaker. Recently, Dr. Srikantia has embarked on public seminars based on non-traditional ways of unleashing human potential. He was selected by the Institute for Management Studies, IMS, an international training organization with a global outreach that features cutting-edge thinkers in management, to offer seminars to their membership base of companies in the United States, Canada, and Europe. He holds a PhD in organizational behavior from Case Western Reserve University and master's degrees in business administration, human resources, and organizational psychology. Param has also been my professor, and I can say that I would not be at Meadville Lombard Theological School today if it weren't for him. A warm welcome to you, Param. Together, we are pleased to invite you into this space, which is connecting people in Cleveland and beyond to our welcoming community. Often the world is not so welcoming. Often the values of the world are neither loving nor just. So may this worship hour be one where our souls are fed by wisdom and a passion that reminds us that life doesn't have to be that way, that there exists a larger love in every human heart, urging us on to what is better. Let this larger love move in our midst today so that we may be changed by it. A very special welcome to you if you're a newcomer to our community, gay or straight, cisgender or transgender, black or brown or white, you are welcome. Our West Shore regulars would love to greet you if you write that you're new or almost new in the Facebook chat. If you happen to have any questions and would like to chat with a live person, West Shore Member Engagement Coordinator Diane Alcorn would love to speak with you. Diane's email address is being added to your Facebook chat as we speak. And your announcements this week will be in your e-news. Once again, welcome to this new day. Every week we light our chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism faith. It is a beautiful reminder that no matter how many jarring events might happen over the course of the week, that this gathered community that is West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church is a source of stability and meaning we can depend on. In that spirit, let us say our chalice lighting words. This is our chalice. In many separate rooms, we light one flame. Flame of passion, flame of compassion, flame of humor, flame of style. We do not accept merely surviving. Let our mission be to thrive. Together in spirit, we are one. Let us witness to the unity of our spirit by saying together our unison affirmation words. Love is the spirit of this church, and service is its law. This is our great covenant, to dwell together in peace, to seek the truth in love, and to help one another. El amor es el espíritu de esta iglesia, y el servicio su ley. Este es nuestro magnífico convenio, vivir juntos en paz, buscar la verdad en el amor, y ayudarnos los unos a los otros. So may it be. Let us each now say the names of people whom we are holding in our personal thoughts and prayers this morning, people in the West Shore community and people beyond, wherever you happen to be. Say into the space in your room these names. And you can even type them into the chat, in your Facebook chat, if you'd like. I will pause for a moment while we do this. This has been our greeting time. We are called out of the 24/7 ordinary world into a community of fellow seekers and searchers that belongs to a larger movement hundreds of years old. It is a circle we belong to, a circle of enabling love. And now let's sing our opening hymn.
Good morning. We will begin this morning with a very brief meditation called the Inner Sky. So I'd like each of you to comfortably sit back in your chairs with your eyes closed and to notice that you have been blessed with an inner sky. When you close your eyes, you feel a certain spaciousness, a certain emptiness, a sky. Just like there's a sky outside, there's a sky within you. And I want you to notice that there are thoughts that will float by, just like there are clouds in the sky. There are feelings that you might be experiencing now. Watch them like they're clouds in the sky. Take a moment and recognize that your inner consciousness is the sky itself. You are not your thoughts. You are not your feelings. You're something much vaster than your thoughts and feelings. You are the sky itself. And you can watch, observe, and witness these thoughts and feelings as they move right across the sky of your inner consciousness. And when you can feel the sky deeply, you can remain unperturbed by the thoughts and feelings and take refuge in the vastness of the sky. You're as unperturbed as the sky. So many things have happened under the sky, but the sky remains silent, unmoving, full of spaciousness. Thank you.
And now to share my reflection. I was the adult in the room, the enlightened presence, when I was in high school as a student and then again in college. When I was a sophomore in high school and then until I graduated and went off to college, then again in my senior year of college, I was caregiver to my paternal grandmother who had Alzheimer's. Grandma Opal was one of my favorite relatives. She did most of the work of raising me. I had a room in my grandparents' house and spent more time there than at my parents' house while growing up. My grandfather died when I was 15. Grandma Opal knew that her memory was going, and she was afraid to live alone. She asked me if I could live with her full time to help her with things such as cooking, cleaning, and caring for her cats. I loved her so much, and I said yes. I couldn't see any way that it could possibly turn out poorly for me. And I thought, even if it did turn out poorly, or it put undue hardship on me, that the substantial sacrifices would be worth it. And they were. And the sacrifices were substantial. My parents panicked, however, quickly capitalized on the situation. They had my grandmother pay my tuition at the time, which was $4,000 a year, to go to my private high school. I'm sure it's more expensive now, and $4,000 sounds like a really good deal. I was a sophomore at that time. By the time I was a junior, her Alzheimer's had substantially worsened. I began giving her medication and made sure she got off to adult daycare in the morning before I went to school. Then when I got home after school and sports, I would make dinner and welcome her home. Life was chaos. I was only sleeping 4 to 5 hours a night. My grades were not good. I did my best to keep up with everything teenagers need to do to get into a good college. I had no social life, and my friends drifted away. My senior year was a blur. My adult relatives were quick to abdicate responsibility to a teenager. My grandmother wanted me to go away to college, so I did. Surprisingly, I got into Hiram College, my first choice. When I would go home to visit her, I was disheartened and disturbed and alarmed that my aunt and dad were doing nothing to help her. She wasn't taking her medications properly. Her house was filthy. She was burning cookware, etc. It was dangerous for her to be alone. All this came to a head when I was a senior in college. My aunt called to inform me that Grandma Opal was in a nursing home because my aunt couldn't take care of her anymore and the stress of dealing with her. My head and heart screamed, but what stress? My aunt wasn't taking care of Grandma. I had been with her for years when I was much younger. All I could think of was seeing Grandma. I drove from Hiram and went to visit her in the home. It was a scary and strange place. The residents looked like they were in comas, and the staff was rude. I told my aunt that I would take a leave of absence from school and live with Grandma again if I could bring her home. And that's what happened. I moved back with Grandma and finished college remotely before there were remote options. But it wasn't perfect by any stretch. Grandma was in far worse state than I had ever seen her. But I held down the fort. Because of me staying with her, she got to stay in the home she loved for an extra year. After a year of me being with her as caregiver, she became too combative with me to keep her home, safe at home. At a point, I told my aunt, it's not safe anymore. By that time, Grandma's name came up on the list for a very nice place, Sunrise, and that's where she went. She really loved it there. I felt like I made the right decision. When I was a college senior caring for Grandma, I had a lot more maturity, experience, and insight than when I was a high school student. In both times of my life, I found that I was the stable, sane presence. My aunt and dad were all too happy to allow me to solve the problem of their mother and what to do with her. However, would constantly nitpick and find fault with everything that I did, and when I wasn't perfect. Maybe one day Grandma got her meds late, or I had been too exhausted to do the dishes. What I learned was that it isn't about perfection. When in survival mode, and this is how I've dealt with the pandemic as well, it can't be about perfection. As long as Grandma had her meds close to the right time, ate healthy food, got to and from adult daycare, and had things to keep her busy and occupied, and was emotionally fulfilled, that's what mattered to me. I did my best to focus on Grandma. Being an enlightened presence for me involved not panicking, not expecting perfection, ignoring the uninformed Karens, and asking for additional help in the form of specialized care when the time was right. I learned that sometimes it is about shutting out competing voices on the outside and listening to your own inner voice, because we all know how much bandwidth we have, and we do our best at every given time. Our best can change from moment to moment. Peace in the moment, for me, means being realistic. Realistic and mindful go a long way towards enlightenment for me, no matter what the conditions in the outside world, and no matter what my age.
Good morning. I'd like to begin by expressing my sincere gratitude to Melinda for introducing me to Anthony, to David, and to Christine, and making it possible for me to speak to all of you at the West Shore Unitarian Universalist Church. I'm extremely grateful for her generous introduction and for all of you for weaving me into the fabric of your programming. The topic for today is being an enlightened presence in a world that is falling apart. And I'm sure many of us here can relate to the topic in terms of the escalating levels of stress and challenge that we have experienced in multiple frontiers of our life. We do know that the pandemic has taken a profound toll on the economic, financial, public health, and social and economic dimensions of many communities. The focus of my discussion and presentation today will be on the spiritual and psychological aspects. I want to first begin by honestly telling you that I'm not speaking to you from the pedestal of being somebody who has in any way mastered the art of being an enlightened presence. I speak to you more as a friend in sharing with you some of the profound insights that I have been exposed to from Eastern wisdom traditions. I'm not a master. In the East, we draw a distinction between masters and teachers. Masters are people who have attained to a heightened state of spiritual functioning and speak from the depth of their personal experience. I'm more of a teacher, somebody who's has an enthusiasm for communicating and sharing things that he or she has read and heard. So I come to you more as somebody who's just sharing what I've heard, communicating what I've heard, rather than as somebody who has mastered what it takes to be an enlightened presence. I will be talking about a handful of pathways, perhaps 5 of them, in what it takes to be an enlightened presence in today's VUCA world. And many of you are familiar with the acronym VUCA, that refers to a world which is volatile, uncertain, chaotic, and complex and ambiguous. Before I begin discussing the 5 pathways, I'd like to make a few preliminary points as a form of a preamble or a foundation to what I'm sharing with you. Some of these aspects that constitute my preamble are very familiar to those of you who have dabbled in the wisdom traditions of the East and West. So I know in many ways I'm preaching to the choir, but just taking a few moments to share some of the assumptions that can bring us together at this difficult time. The first one is what I call the centrality of contrast. The centrality of contrast is simply an idea that while we often choose one end of a continuum, like we choose happiness, and we say we choose happiness over unhappiness, or we choose good over evil, the centrality of contrast is an idea that comes from tantric and other Taoistic traditions that recognize that good and evil are both two sides of the same continuum. Evil and contrast is what enables us to value. Like, for example, if there was no evil in the world, we probably would not truly appreciate the value of goodness. Similarly, if we did not have sickness in the world, we probably would not have a deeper appreciation for the gift of health. If there was no meanness in the world, we probably would not appreciate generosity. If there was no hate, we probably wouldn't have a special appreciation for love. If things like such as the sermon weren't boring, you probably wouldn't find other things in life that you would find engaging. It is the idea that while we might identify with one end of this continuum, a path of totality implies that we accept both, because it is unhappiness that gives meaning to happiness. It is hate that gives meaning to love. Why am I reminding us of this? Because clearly at these times, there are times where we will despair and we will be unhappy and miserable. But for us to begin to appreciate that the misery or the unhappiness that we might be going through is actually what enables the opposite end of the continuum, namely the happiness and the bliss and peace that we could experience at other times. In addition to the centrality of contrast, there is a recurring theme in the Eastern traditions of transcending duality. So, for example, we think of peaks and valleys are opposites, but the Indian mystic Osho reminds us that peaks and valleys are not opposites. It's just language that has led to us constructing those as opposites. We see peaks and valleys as opposites because we refer to the dictionary and we look at what's the opposite of peak and we say, well, that's a valley. Well, in reality, says Osho, if you drive into nature, you will find that peaks and valleys are not opposites. They're actually connected. Every peak leads to a valley, and every valley leads to a peak. The two go hand in hand together. So it is with night and day. And the Eastern traditions talk about how we are often creating, out of this polarization, an inside battle within us. You know, we reject one part of us, embrace the other part of us. I like the hardworking Param. I reject the lazy Param. And the Eastern traditions, Osho explains, have actually talked about the importance, as we said, of transcending the duality and recognizing that peaks and valleys are not actually opposites, they're connected. Similarly, what makes a valley is our attitude to it. Suppose I start dancing on the valley and roasting some s'mores and singing. Instantaneously, I have transformed the valley into a peak experience. In other words, what makes valleys and peaks is not their physical shape, but our attitude, a way of being that we bring to each one of those states. Another recurring thought in the Eastern tradition, says Osho, is given by the metaphor of the circumference and the wheel. You know, you're driving down the highway at 60 miles an hour. The circumference is rotating very quickly. The circumference is our life as we live it in the everyday life. Our everyday life, we are running in 100 different directions at breakneck speed, trying to accomplish so much. It's living our life on the circumference. And the central challenge of spiritual growth in the Eastern traditions is for us to be able to leave the circumference alone and remember and remind ourselves that while the wheel is rotating, the wheel also has an unmoving center, a center that is always still, around which the wheel rotates. And the central challenge of spirituality to Indian mystics like Osho is for us to jump from the circumference where we are lost in feverish, relentless activity to that deep inner center. A similar metaphor is given by the ocean, as many of us are familiar with it. At the surface, the waves are lashing and there's tremendous activity. But in the depth of the ocean, there is a stillness and a silence that is always unmoving. And it is the challenge for each of us in these difficult times. While the circumference might be rotating with chaos, with anxiety, reverberating with tensions of various kinds, for us to be able to find that center, the unmoving center of the metaphorical wheel within us. I also want to quote in this context a very famous TED talk that was delivered by Kelly McGonigal. I recommend the talk to you. It's called How to Make Stress Your Friend. In it, she discusses a study of over 30,000 individuals conducted over 8 years, studying people who suffered an extremely high level of stress in their life. And the not so surprising finding of the study was that it was not the stress that affected people. The debilitating effects of the stress were not felt by everybody. For the minority of people who welcomed the stress, who embraced the stress, who constantly reminded themselves that this stress is good, it's going to make me more resilient, it is going to make me stronger, who did not resist the stress, they actually did not suffer any of the harmful effects of stress. Kelly McGonigal's research then awakens us to a very surprising discovery that it's not the stress that might hurt you, harm you, or kill you, but it's more your attitude towards it. If you're able to dance with the stress and welcome it, not as something bad, but as your friend, as something that'll help you, you will actually find the stress quite liberating. And it will not have any of the deleterious physiological effects that we normally associate with heightened levels of stress. So,
And now for the offering. In today's uncertain times, we find ourselves called more now than ever. We are called into the delicate dance between self-care and action. In the midst of our congregants and our spiritual home, West Shore, we find opportunity for both. This is a sacred space, welcoming all. West Shore's doors are open, and we can hold our love and our values within our community and forward them to the outside world due to your generosity and support. I know how much West Shore means to me, and to you too. Now please consider texting a one-time gift to West Shore. Instructions for how to do that can be found on your screen. Thank you for considering a gift this morning. It's only because of your generosity that we can do what we do. This includes beautiful music that we have going on to hear right now.
So now let me move on to the 5 pathways that I talked about. Last week, it was the birthday of the Indian mystic Osho, and some of you may not be familiar with his work. Osho was an Indian mystic, mischievous and perhaps somewhat controversial in some circles, who left behind a legacy of over 2,000 books, written with a very non-serious attitude, but combining his profound understanding of all the Eastern traditions. With all the years that I've spent studying Eastern traditions, I haven't come across an author as penetrating and powerful and as humorous as Osho in bringing us the lightness of these traditions. So inspired by his work, I will talk about 5 pathways to being an enlightened presence. Okay. Now, the first pathway that I talk about is called From Chattering Monkey to Mindfulness. What is the chattering monkey? How many of you have noticed that even while I'm talking to you, there's a voice in your head that is simultaneously talking to you? That voice, the Eastern mystics have called the chattering monkey. And I have Curious George with me to make that experience a little more vivid. So imagine there's a chattering monkey that's continuously talking to me. Right now it's saying, hey, Melinda went out on a limb and introduced you to this congregation. You better make this talk interesting and fun. I hope everybody likes it. I sure don't want to disappoint Melinda, or Anthony for that matter. So notice that there's a voice in our head that's continuously talking to us. And the Eastern mystics have called this voice the chattering monkey. Why have they called this the chattering monkey? Because it's the metaphor for the mind. Have you noticed how quickly your mind moves? In fact, even while I'm talking to you in the space of this 30 minutes, your mind will wander off to faraway places. Some of you will be doing your grocery shopping at Trader Joe's while you're still sitting in front of the computer, pretending to be listening to me. And so it is with the chattering mind, which jumps from branch to branch. And just like monkeys travel far and wide, jumping from branch to branch, so does the chattering monkey. But the chattering monkey can actually make your life unnecessarily complicated. How many of you know that many times your chattering monkey has caused you an unnecessary level of stress? Often it makes up stories, and we get sucked into those stories and the tension and the stress that they create. I once worked in an office where my boss would walk in through the main door, say hello to me every day, and she would go to her office. I was used to that. One day she walked straight to her office without greeting me. It's at those moments that Curious George will sit up and start screaming in your head. And Curious George surely sat up that day and said, did you just see what happened? She just walked away to her office without saying hello to you today. I bet she's mad at you. Think about it. You were there with her till 8:30 in a late meeting last night, and she seemed to be happy. What could possibly have gone wrong between 8:30 at night and 7:30 in the morning? I bet it's her boss's boss. I hope you'll be able to keep your job. Your boss seems to be mad at you. Notice how many sentences Curious George has generated just because he saw my boss walking into the office and walking into her office without saying hello to me as she usually does. And then Curious George, of course, continued. He said, I hope I'm not losing my job. Let me go back at lunchtime and make sure that everything is okay. 25 or 30 sentences. Notice how much continuous inner chatter happens in our minds and how it constantly distorts the realities that we inhabit. I went back to my boss's office at lunchtime only to discover that she was leaving for lunch with 3 of my colleagues without inviting me. Why? Simply because she was overseeing a project that did not involve me, and that project was going badly, and her boss had been giving her a hard time about that project that was on a downward spiral. So naturally, she convened a meeting with my colleagues and did not invite me because she did not want me to have to witness the spectacle of her humiliating and pressuring my colleagues to get their act together. So she leaves discreetly for lunch. And that's when Curious George sits up and is even more appalled. He says, did you notice? Not only did she not say hello to you in the morning, but she did not even invite you to her favorite Indian restaurant. And then he says, you better come up with a spectacular idea by the morning to make sure that you don't lose your job. something that impresses her so much. So I go back home faithfully, stay up all night, come up with the most spectacular idea that I can generate. I show up at work and I share it with her. And she listens to me patiently and says, Param, thank you for all this effort, but I don't think we'll get top management support for implementing the idea. It's at that point that Curious George is so furious, he should actually be called Furious George. He goes berserk, like he's broken into a meth lab and smoked all the meth in there. He says, what a jerk your boss is. Notice what's going on here, folks. Even though Curious George is the voice inside my head that's talking continuously, all those vocalizations that are going on are creating lenses of perception, lenses that shape how I see and relate to my boss. For example, the first time Curious George is upset that she didn't stop by and say hello, he says she's so mean, so I put on the mean lens. Now, when I look at my boss, I see a boss who's very mean. Next, when she leaves for the Indian restaurant without inviting me, Curious George says that's so unfair she didn't invite you. Although it's just a voice in my head, now that affects how I perceive my boss. And now I see my boss as mean and unfair. And the next time, Curious George has me come up with this great idea that my boss doesn't accept. Curious George says she's a jerk. Now I wear these jerk lenses. Now my boss looks like a jerk to me. Through 3 layers of perception, prescription lenses, my boss looks like a mean, unfair jerk. Each of those were adjectives that were chosen by Curious George to characterize my boss. Here, right here, folks, we are experiencing the tragedy of the human condition. Notice there's a voice in my head that's constantly making up stories. How many of you know that there's at least been 1 or 2 relationships in your life that have been destroyed by your chattering monkey? Now, what is the way out? It is simple. It is to be able to take off those lenses and to again recognize that these stories and interpretations were just stories and interpretations made up by our chattering monkey. Eastern mystics like Osho recommend mindfulness. All of you have heard of mindfulness. Mindfulness is simply the capacity to watch these thoughts and feelings as if they're clouds floating by. So imagine if I was able to watch all these judgments about my boss just like they were clouds floating by. I say, oh my God, chattering monkey says she's mean. Now he says she's unfair. Now he says she's a jerk. Notice, folks, clouds can float by. The sky of our consciousness is a sky. It's vast. Don't mistake your thoughts, which are the clouds in the sky. And so that's the fundamental distinction in mindfulness, to recognize the thoughts and feelings that are constantly, going through our minds are just clouds. We can watch them go by. We can observe them. We can witness them and not get sucked into the tension and stress that they create. It's not just about other people. You think you know who you are, and I think I know who I am. I put it to you that you think you know who you are, but who you are is just a collection of all the stories and mysteries, interpretations that the chattering monkey has made up. Because, for example, in my elementary school, I did poorly at math. And my chattering monkey said, Param, you suck at math. And then I wasn't socially very popular. And my chattering monkey said, you are just an unpopular kid because a few kids did not agree to play with me on a particular day. And then, of course, I would note I grew up in a family where everybody was much older than me, and not too many people seemed to be interested in the things that I had to share because I was far younger. And then my chattering monkey said, Param, you're uninteresting. Notice in an instant, my self-image became somebody who sucks at math, somebody who is not interesting to people, and somebody who doesn't have a lot of friends. All of a sudden, this becomes my self-image. The tragedy, though, is that we become entrapped in our own self-image, constructed out of stories and interpretations that we live out of when things that have happened to us when we were 4 and 5. Why am I talking to you about this? Because it brings us to the next pathway, which is called Unsolved Tears. It's the idea, And unsolved tears is an expression that the Indian mystic Osho used to describe experiences of sadness, shame, and disappointment, and failure and pain that we carry within us. We've all had our share of them. But when things happen to us in our life, either individual things like divorces, bankruptcies, job loss, or collective tragedies like the pandemic that we are suffering through, the racial conflict and tension, and all these things happen, often these events become like a magnet and they pull for unsolved tears. What are these unsolved tears? They are moments of grief that we have not fully grieved. There are times when we have wept profusely and been with our own sadness, but there are other times where we have tried to run away from our sadness, flee from our sadness. We have accumulated that sadness within us because we have not grieved, and those are unsolved tears. Osho talks about how we often wear masks to cover up our unsolved tears. For example, one of my unsolved tear moments was when I was riding on the back seat of my car in New Delhi, and somebody mocked me and said, "This kid is so stupid. He never says anything that is smart or intelligent." In that moment, my whole world collapsed. I began to develop a mask, and I spent the next 25 years, perhaps, earning a PhD and earning the equivalent of 4 master's degrees. Why? Because somebody called me stupid when I was a child. Try to look within your life and find these moments of pain, humiliation, and sadness, and try to understand how the child in you, how the adolescent or the teenager in you reacted to that pain and started weaving masks that you used to cover up the pain. I bet you would recognize several masks that you're using. The tragedy with these masks, though, is that even though they seem to provide us some degree of relief, I wear 3 masks: that I'm a very nice person, that I'm smart, and that I'm goofy. In reality, if I peel away the masks, there's a lot of sadness there. And I can trace these masks to moments of extreme sadness and failure and shame that I've had throughout my life. But while these masks provide us a certain level of temporary relief, in the long run, they don't truly work. Because if we are trying to compensate for a real or imaginary inferiority, no matter how much we compensate, the sense of scarcity and failure never goes away. You all heard that there are many actors and actresses in Hollywood that we think of as beautiful, but they still think of themselves as ugly. In the same vein, the fact that I earned the equivalent of 4 master's degrees and a PhD, do you think it ameliorated or alleviated my sense of being stupid? No. I'm so insecure. Even now, I'm plagued by feelings of insecurity, of being stupid or not smart enough, right? So I want us to remember that there is a conundrum here that we have to confront. The conundrum is that things happen to us in our lives that make us feel insecure, and we try to compensate for them by wearing masks or covering up sources of shame. But those never work. And they don't work because, try to understand this. If I tell you that somebody called me stupid when I was 9 years old, and I'm trying as hard as I can to be smart, trying as hard as I can to be smart, what does it tell you that I've decided? I've decided that I'm not smart. Otherwise, why would I be trying so hard to be smart? And that is the conundrum. If I've decided that I'm not smart, how would I ever come across, feel smart inside? Because I've already made the decision that I'm not smart. So it is with all of our compensatory efforts. We decide we are not smart, we decide we are not good, and whatever it is that we decide, we try to compensate for it. But the compensation doesn't work because we have already made our decision. And therefore, I spent 25 years of my life trying to prove that I'm smart without recognizing that I would never feel smart inside. Now, Osho recommends a completely different strategy, a very non-linear approach to overcoming our unsolved tears. Unsolved tears are based on the idea that there's something wrong with me, that I'm inadequate. And I spend the next 30, 40 years trying to overcome that inadequacy. I might build a big CV. I might have multiple luxury houses, mansions. I might have a private jet. All of these are compensations if I've not dealt with the original insecurity. That's why you find often people who are extremely successful in the eyes of the world who carry unsolved tears within them. Now, the way out of this is simple. Now, bear with me while I walk you through a few rapid fire questions. Okay. First, I want you to notice that think of all your friends in the West Shore congregation. Maybe you don't see them as often because of COVID, but you know them all. How many of you would agree that there's nobody exactly like you in the entire West Shore UU congregation? There's not one person who's exactly like you. I bet that you know there isn't. Spread the net further. How many of you know there's not one person in the whole state of Ohio who's exactly like you? Not one person in any of the 50 states of the USA who's exactly like you. Not one person in any country in the world who's exactly like you. In other words, there isn't one person on this entire planet who's exactly like you. That is the fundamental breakthrough that Osho is talking about. When you can awaken to the recognition that you are so unique, special, and extraordinary, that there's not one person like you on this entire planet, you can then gravitate from our usual achievement paradigm, which is saying, I suck, I have to do something great. I suck, there's something wrong with me, I better achieve something, which is the scarcity-based paradigm of achievement, to an abundance-based paradigm of achievement, where you wake up to the magnificence of your own being, recognize, I'm Param, there's not one other human being like me on this entire world. I'm Melinda, and there's not one other human being like me on this entire world. Or I'm Anthony, or I'm Christine, or I'm David. I'm naming all the members of the congregation whose names I know. Okay? There's not one person like you on this entire planet. You begin to start laughing. Why? Because you recognize this cosmic joke that all of us are busting our ass, excuse the language, to try to prove that we are special, we are unique, special, and extraordinary, without recognizing that we have been created unique, special, and extraordinary. When you can recognize that, all of a sudden, a lightness of being begins to permeate your whole existence. And when you can start dancing and laughing and singing, recognizing how unique, special, and extraordinary you are, you begin to recognize that you are unique not in an egoistic way, not in an exclusionary way. The person you might not pay any attention to at the grocery store who's bagging your grocery is also unique, special, and extraordinary. There's not one other human being like them on this entire planet. And then a deep appreciation for life arises. Every leaf is unique, special, and extraordinary. There are no two leaves alike. There are no two rocks and pebbles alike. And all of a sudden, you begin to recognize that every moment is unique, special, and extraordinary. And Osho reminds us, contrast this to how we normally live life. We are trying to save time. You know, we take a lot of elaborate steps to save time, and then we get busy killing time. Why? When every moment is unique, special, and extraordinary, just rejoice, is what Osho would have us say. But it's not just the things we like about us that are unique, special, and extraordinary. Folks, I want you to start celebrating the ways in which you're messed up. I want to tell you this. I am pretty messed up. I've been married 4 times. 4 times. And I'm a management professor who actually had to file for bankruptcy and lost my house in foreclosure at one point in my life. How many of you can say anyone who's been married 4 times has gone bankrupt, foreclosure? I'm pretty messed up. But you know what? When you start overcoming the shame about a sense of failure, you can celebrate that too. For example, I'm also unique, special, and extraordinary in the ways in which I'm messed up. I bet none of you in the West Shore UU congregation has been married 4 times and has also gone bankrupt and foreclosed. I bet nobody is messed up in exactly the same way that I am. I could look in the entire planet And no two human beings are messed up in exactly the same way. Why am I taking you down this road? Because we have so much shame around the ways in which we are messed up, and our insecurities relate to that. What if we were able to start laughing at the ways in which we are messed up, celebrating the ways in which we are messed up, and saying, you know what, I'm so unique, special, and extraordinary that not one other human being on this planet is messed up in exactly the same way that I'm messed up. And all of a sudden, we transcend the shame, and that is the moment at which the valley has become a peak. Folks, I am running out of time, and I want to stick to the time limits that are there for this talk. So I shall mention one more of the paths and leave two more to your imagination. The third path is discovering, from roboticism to awakened being. We often live very mechanical lives. In fact, somebody said, look at someone who you think has made it to New York City, their entire day can be reduced to a few steps. Hitting the snooze button, brushing their teeth, taking a shower, driving to work, flicking people off on the road, as many New York City drivers are given to doing, getting to office, typing up memos, having a few conversations, getting in the car again, angry at other drivers who are overtaking you, cutting you off on the street, having your dinner, going to bed, hitting the snooze button. It's a caricature of modernity that all of us have become robots as we go through the same predictable, repetitive motions every day. The paradox, though, as the Zen masters have told us, is that we have become like robots. And the more technology has developed, the more human beings have become robots. But the paradox is this: if years of our life can go away like this, as we are walking through life, the state is called robotic somnambulism. We are sleepwalking through life like robots. We're super efficient at what we're doing, but we're not really enjoying this moment, enjoying the present moment, or being conscious and fully aware. The trick, say the Zen master, is to notice how asleep you are, how mechanically you're getting through the day. And when we can see that we have become a robot, in that instant, we are not a robot, because a robot is not capable of seeing it's a robot. And at the moment at which you begin to recognize, oh my God, I've become so mechanical and robotic, you're no longer robotic. You start awakening to the mystery of something very beautiful in us. We are human beings. And what is being? I want to leave you with this thought. Being, in most of our modern industrial societies, we have been hypnotized into a paradigm that says you need to have. What do you need to have? Money. Why? In order to perhaps buy what you most want to buy, or perhaps to vacation in Paris. Why? In order to be happy. You need money. You need to have money to do what you most want to do. Vacation in Paris in order to be happy. In other words, the progression is you need to have in order to do, in order to be. But how many of you would recognize that you could be miserable sitting in a five-star hotel in Paris, and you could be joyous walking your dog in Cleveland and picking up her poop? That simple statement holds the key to a deep inner revolution. It holds the key to the fact that you can travel around the world, and often you'll see children too poor to own the shirt on their back, playing by a garbage dump with a milk carton tied to a string, joyously happy. And you'll see in an affluent part of the neighborhood in some other part of the world, 3 children with a room full of toys, inconsolably sad and unhappy that they were not able to have that $99 Lego for Christmas that they had set their minds on. In other words, being happy is not dependent on doing and having. This is called busting the myth of external conditionality. We had made too much of our happiness dependent upon external certainties. Like, I'll be happy. We had made our happiness be dependent upon going to sports events. We had made our happiness about being dependent upon partying with and seeing our friends. There was an external condition that had to be fulfilled. And if that was fulfilled, I would be happy. That is not a powerful or generative way to live life. Because if I make my happiness be dependent on something outside, that outside can change in an instant, just like COVID did. And then all of a sudden, we find our happiness be destroyed. The challenge, though, is for each one of us to discover a deep sense of happiness and joy that comes from within, that is not dependent on anything outside. Osho, the Indian mystic, says there are 4 ways we can live life. One way to live life is to live as a businessman. As a businessman, he looks at a rose a rose, and says, how much can I sell this rose for? And that's the orientation of the business person. Another way to live life, says Osho, is with the orientation of the scientist. The scientist wants to study the rose, wants to dissect the rose, place it under a microscope, label all the parts, and understand it intellectually. That's the scientist's orientation to the rose. The artist's orientation to the rose, the artist would never dream of destroying the rose by slicing it and placing it under a microscope. The artist would say, oh my God, I'm going to paint the rose. I'm going to take a photo of the rose. I'm going to write a poem of the rose. I'm going to celebrate the rose in its holistic entirety. And it would be about dancing with the rose and writing poetry. But Osho says, while you can be a scientist, a businessman, and a scientist or an artist, all of those are viable ways to live life. He invites us to step into the 4th way, which is the way of the mystic. The mystic is intoxicated with the mystery of the universe. And while the scientist wants to reduce the mystery of the universe through rational explanation, evidence, and discovery, the mystic is just happy, celebrating the mystery of the universe. Let the beauty of the rose remain mysterious. Where did that rose come from? Where was it yesterday? And where will the beauty of the rose disappear when it dies tomorrow? The mystic celebrates the mystery. He or she embraces human beings as mysteries, not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be embraced. And that is how we could also embrace life, not as a problem to be solved, but as a mystery to be embraced. Osho also talked about living your life, watching your life like it's a movie. Usually, says Osho, we go to a movie and we forget it's a movie and we get so engrossed with it. We start crying in the movie. We start getting angry in the movie at the actors because we have started watching the movie as if it's real life. Osho says you need to do just the opposite. Start watching your real life like it's a movie. And when shit happens, the plot just got a little more interesting. And that is how we live our life, as an occasion for celebration, joy, and laughter. A couple of reading recommendations for those of you who might be intrigued by what I shared about Osho. One of his finest books that you can order from Amazon or anywhere is called Intimacy. The author is Osho, O-S-H-O. Intimacy is the book. I can't tell you how many emails I receive from people who say that single book changed their life. It's about a deep sense of intimacy with oneself, not necessarily a sense of intimacy with the other, but then it's only when you fall in love with yourself and when you accept yourself unconditionally for who you are and for who you are not, that you can actually love other people. So this is about starting to love and accept yourself just the way you are. Another book, which is perhaps the smallest of the 2,000 books that Osho wrote, is called Meditation for Busy People, Stress-Beating Strategies for People with No Time to Meditate. Unlike meditative practices that require you to take 20 minutes, this is a book that gives you tips on how you can meditate while you're vacuuming your floor or cleaning your car. Another book that I would recommend by Osho is called Joy. My son says, Dad, the day you read this book, my life changed for the better. And he was, I think, about 12 years old when I read it. And he said his life became joyous because from reading this book, I stopped bothering him and torturing him in the ways that I used to. So I recommend these books by Osho. If any of you like my style of presenting, I do a free Sunday webinar every Sunday that runs from 2 to 2:30. If you're interested in being on the mailing list for the webinar, I also post those on my YouTube channel. Please send me a text and I will put you on the mailing list. Give me your email address in the text and your name. The number is 216-374-7413. Once again, that number is 216-374-7413. I wish you happy holidays and Merry Christmas and a truly ecstatic new year. May this year be the fulfillment of all of your joyous aspirations. And may you find love and laughter in every moment. May the love be with you. Bye-bye.
Now bring your chalice close to extinguish it, as I extinguish the chalice here. We extinguish our flames, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry with us until we meet again. And just as a reminder, after the service today, there will not be coffee hour or sermon chat. And now the benediction.
And now the benediction. The purpose of my benediction is to enable each of us today to awaken to a deeper sense of compassion for ourselves. I want you to sit back comfortably, close your eyes, and spend a few minutes with a quick helicopter view of some of the greatest challenges that you have faced in your life. And for you to have compassion for these challenges, for how you struggled with them, to feel a sense of affection for yourself, a deeper love for yourself, for you to come to accept yourself with all of your imperfections, for you to notice that there's often a voice in your head condemning you that you haven't done enough, while opening your heart and accepting yourself unconditionally for who you are and for who you're not. It's only when you can accept yourself unconditionally and joyously with all of your imperfections, to embrace the procrastinator in you, to embrace that part of you that seeks perfection, and to say, I will embrace the imperfect parts in me, for I seek the totality, not just perfectionism. For you to fall in love with yourself, for it's only when you fall in love with yourself that you will be able to love another. Thank you.